You want some anarchy? Let's have some anarchy. Locked was directed by David Yarovesky, who did Brightburn, and was written by Michael Ulrika Ross, who did Teresa's, among other projects. Check out the respective IMDb pages for the full list of other work. And this is a U.S. remake of an Argentinian movie called 4x4 that came out in 2019. I recently reviewed it. You can check out that review if you want. If you have seen 4x4, then you pretty much know the premise of this. If you haven't seen 4x4, let me give you a brief rundown. A thief breaks into the wrong SUV, and the owner of that SUV talks to him via crazy technology, with not a cellular telephone, but a car phone. Not a car phone like in the 80s where you could hit somebody over the head and it's a brick and a registered lethal weapon in about 20 states. No, this is one of those fancy screen phones. Woo-hoo-hoo. And yeah, he basically tortures him. We get a lot of conversations, and then eventually an ending happens. If you've seen 4x4, you know what that ending is. If you haven't, let's just say if you're not a fan of isolation horror, one location horror shoots, I don't know if it's going to be for you. But I will say that for the most part, it was all right. 4x4 wasn't great. I don't know if it was crying out for a remake necessarily. I hadn't even heard of the movie until recently, and then watched it just a couple days ago. And then saw this was coming out. And I'm like, okay, Bill Skarsgård, okay, he's good. I mean, he couldn't save the Crow remake, but nobody could. FKA Twigs certainly couldn't. Stick to singing, honey. You're not a good actor. So check out my review of The Crow if you want to know my opinions. But I like Bill Skarsgård. He was Count Orlok in the most recent reimagining, rendition, whatever you want to call it, of Nosferatu that is currently on Peacock. And he plays a thief named Eddie that basically breaks into the wrong SUV, and this SUV is owned by a man named William that's tired of people breaking into his vehicle, much like the Dr. Enrique in 4x4. And William here is played by Anthony Hopkins, Sir Anthony Hopkins, as it were, and via, the technology and a few souped up things for this particular rendition. Yeah, it's basically a goddamn torture chamber. So, I will say this much about 4x4. They kept things low-key, and they kept things more survival. Like, it was more, using the environment and everything, and while it didn't give us everything that we needed, it gave us enough social commentary, especially since it was in Argentina, wherever it was in Argentina, more crime-filled area. It kind of held true. It could be a number of goddamn cities in the U.S., if we're being perfectly honest. And it also features 28 producers. I'm not kidding, by the way, when I say that. I actually had to look it up. As I was watching the end credits before I decided to leave the theater, and I'll tell you my opinion on the movie here in just a minute. Sam Raimi executive produced it. Bill Skarsgård executive produced it. And 28 executive producers. There are blockbusters that don't have that many goddamn executive producers or producers. I mean, Jesus, tap dancing Christ, what in the world? Now, the car that they use in this is called a Dolus. That's actually just a name they make up. It was actually a 2020 Land Rover or Range Rover, whatever. And as far as souping things up, basically, this car has a lot of bells and whistles, and also Anthony Hopkins is a lot more diabolical, almost, veering towards Jigsaw levels and stuff like that. And I'm going to be perfectly honest here. I wanted to like this a lot more than I did. And again, I hold no love for the original, but the original at least had a low-key feel to it and wasn't perfect, but was fine. This got more goofy, and yeah, you need to lean into the ridiculousness. And I will say that there were a few points where I was like, okay, I like where they're taking this story. I like them expanding on this. We don't really get much of an idea of the original guy, Ciro, what his deal is, and we find out later that he has a wife and child. At least this, we find out that Eddie is trying to do good. He's trying to get his car repaired, do deliveries and stuff like that, and he's also trying to be there for his daughter more because he's a thief. He's possibly, a career criminal, possibly a drug addict. Who knows? I mean, he does vape. I'm not knocking him. I'm just saying, he does that, and he talks about various other things that he's done and other things that get exposed as William is basically talking to him via the crazy, technologically advanced phone, if that's even what people call it. And I will say that both Bill and Anthony seem to be having a blast. Unfortunately, this movie just veers onto the goofy side way too often, to the point where I get what they were trying to say. And yeah, you need to soup up a couple different things. You can't do a shot-for-shot remake unless you're Gus Van Sant doing the 1998 unnecessary remake of Psycho. Thank you, Gus Van Sant, you stupid son of a bitch. And you dupid son of a bitch. But that being said, there are a few points where we get a little backstory on Eddie. That's fine. We find out a little more about William, but the thing is neither character is really that sympathetic. I mean, you kind of almost veer a little bit towards Eddie, but at the same time, it seems like he's had numerous chances to clean up his life. And then there actually are a couple parts I'll talk about in the spoiler, where he realizes that, oh shit, I actually, would have been totally fine regardless of this, and I'll get to that in a minute. But you don't really have any sympathy for William, and you have to wonder, you find out a few things about his character, but how in the world was he able to do this? And also the number of times that the car was broken into that Enrique talks about seemed inflated, but then again, I guess for the city that they were in Argentina, maybe not. In this one, it's a few times, and yeah, one time is probably too many, but I don't know, this just didn't work for me. This felt like a slog, and it really, really got goofy later on. It was almost like Batman or comic book villain-like, and not in a good way. That being said, there were moments that I wanted to like this. I mean, maybe it was supposed to be a dark comedy, but it just didn't necessarily work. The dialogue in particular was dog shit. Then again, Teresa wasn't exactly known for its great dialogue, but it had its moments. The Ruins was better, but I digress. This just didn't work for me. This ultimately didn't work. Even though it seemed like Anthony and Bill were having a lot of fun, it limps along to a conclusion. And yeah, it tries to have more, adding more of the before he got in the car and if he's able to see his family again. I'll just say that much. But this isn't theaters if you want to check it out. But this isn't, it was an unnecessary U.S. remake and ultimately kind of a flat U.S. remake, even with the twists that they tried to put on, spins they tried to put on. Anyway, 3, 2, 1, and spoilers. So basically, Eddie can't get his car, can't come up with the money, is calling people, doesn't answer his daughter's call because his daughter really wants him to be in his life. He's kind of been delinquent on child support payments, but is trying to do better. He wants to get back to his delivery job, but he needs to make some quick cash. He does end up buying a burger with some money that he has. And there's heavy-handed, beat you over the head stuff about the downtrodden and everything, and we should all lend a helping hand because there are people, unfortunately, that don't want to be helped at the end of the day. They're just so locked into a life like that. But there are so many, and I work retail, and I've seen it a lot, just based on the interactions I've had with people, that there are numerous ones that just need a helping hand, just need a push to get, go to the WorkSource building or whatever it is in your state. Just get some help, just get a helping hand, sometimes get a snack. And I'm not saying handouts in a way where you do that all the time, but sometimes a little helping hand, a little, gesture goes a long way. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying there haven't been times that I have not helped people, but I try to do good. I try to. And that is something that this movie could have leaned into a little bit more, but unfortunately, William is just kind of a goofy villain. A really, really goofy villain, in fact. And yeah, William, wants to teach Eddie a lesson, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is William has terminal cancer, and in 4x4, Enrique might have some health issues, but he was a doctor. He was a doctor that also had a remote way of keeping an eye on Ciro. And in this, William is obviously just in a high-rise loft apartment area where he's keeping an eye on him, and he mentions he has about 4 months to live. Now, during the initial time where Eddie realizes that he's locked in, he also had gotten a scratch ticket. He gotten a couple scratch tickets and hadn't won anything and stuff like that. And he's freaking out because he found some sunglasses. Okay, maybe he can find this, but now he's suddenly locked in. Now he tries to break open, or get into the door frame and stuff like that, but ends up cutting his arm because the lock ends up catching on him and slices his arm. He tries to shoot, much like Ciro did in 4x4, and ends up shooting his leg. Good job there. And then he won't answer the phone. He wants to answer the phone. Eventually he doesn't. William is, and I love Anthony Hopkins. And Anthony Hopkins gave it his all here. He wasn't playing down to the material, much like Helen Mirren in Winchester when she could have. But Helen Mirren is fucking tremendous, magnificent, and Has nothing to do with this movie. I just felt the need to shout out Helen Mirren. But that being said, Anthony Hopkins was like, oh dear, well, what's going on? Or what's going on, Eddie? What's going on? And obviously, he's a diabolical son of a bitch. He's doing this just to pay people, or cause, damage and stuff like that. One logic loophole I didn't necessarily care for is, yeah, he could control the heat, he could control the AC, and he's trying to get him to not swear, trying to get him to not do this, and he's talking about his daughter's favorite music, all this stuff, and it turns out his daughter was, killed in a robbery, and he's tired of the downtrodden, tired of this, self-made man, whatever. Yeah, he got help, but, there are people that aren't willing to help themselves. The heavy-handed stuff gets a little bit out of control, but one thing that bothered me was, Bill Skarsgård's character would pass out here and there, and he suddenly woke up at one point and realized that his leg was stitched up. What happened? Apparently he was totally passed out, totally out of it, and William ended up somehow getting in there and stitching him up because he is a doctor, I guess. I was able to do that and leave him some snacks, leave him some water. There's even a point where Eddie is afraid he's going to have to drink his own piss because he doesn't have any water, he doesn't have any supplies. We don't think we're going to ever be locked in an SUV, luxury or otherwise, and we're not going to be able to get out, so we don't think to bring snacks if we're trapped in a vehicle. I guess we should do that from now on. Bring a fanny pack like The Rock in that one picture. You know the one. But that being said, what we essentially get is, that's a logic loophole, I don't know. That was just kind of goofy to me, because he had to come down so goddamn far to do it. And yes, Enrique talked to Ciro and saw him, but it seemed like he was close, and it seemed like the buildings were a little more close-knit. This just seemed silly, and it was parked in a weird area, and it was parked as a way to trap people. That's basically what he did. Well, he wanted to just do it just to trap people, or so he said. Now, there is one point where Eddie gets underneath the glove compartment when he sees where this cookie is that William had left him. And he somehow is managing to try and get underneath and try to find like some switches, try to find some stuff, because it's all electronic, but he's street smart and he knows there's a way to get around this technology. But there's tasing seats also. Yeah, I probably forgot to mention that. There's tasing seats. Again, it's like a saw trap. I'm sorry. What if William hits the wrong button while he's driving? He's going to crash. I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking too much into it, but nevertheless. Basically, he can't do it because the cameras are all over, but he can't see underneath that glove compartment, so he's trying to have him keep his hands and everything, and Eddie, you're basically going to end up dying, but I'm going to keep you alive because I want to keep torturing you. Oh, yes, and also turns out in the interim about those scratch tickets that he had a $500 scratch ticket winner. And if he had been able to find a gas station or a convenience store to cash it out, that would have been more than enough to fix the issue with his vehicle and get his deliveries back in order, and he would have been able to pick up his daughter. And he feels bad. Even at one point, he leaves a voicemail for his daughter, but it won't send. He's nervous that he's not going to be able to ever see her again. He's obviously down, completely down. And then there's a point in 4x4 where the vehicle gets backed up and driven around a bit, and then Ciro manages to crash it to try and get out, and that leads to the conclusion of the movie. Sorry, bit of a spoiler there, but nevertheless. I'm in the spoiler section here. And then that leads to a standoff where Enrique is holding him like a hostage. And Enrique is not in the right, and neither is Ciro. I mean, Ciro, to me, is a lot... Ciro's not necessarily sympathetic, neither is Enrique. Eddie's sort of sympathetic because maybe you could see he's trying to do something, he's just down on his luck. But you also don't know exactly what he went through before. And William... I'm sorry, I mean, regardless of whether he's an old man with very little time left, there's just no, there's no grounding with his character. And I know I probably shouldn't expect that in a psychological horror, but this is more horror than psychological horror. This is more, again, almost verging on torture porn. But then the car starts, and it turns out that basically William can control it remotely, and can control it to the point that he's able to drive around the goddamn city and see some people beating up a guy in the alleyway. So he says, oh, you want some anarchy? Let's have some anarchy. And he runs one guy over, and then he rams one guy into the gate, and basically says, I'll tell you what, Eddie, if he can stand up all the way, I'll let you go. And then he rams him and crushes his head in the gate. Now, that might sound interesting, but by this point, I was pretty checked out because I go, okay, they're making use of the bigger budget with the 28 executives slash producers. My God. Anyway, did everybody take turns funding this goddamn movie? I mean, that's fine. I'm all for small By the way, there were like 10 studios that were listed. I think I've heard of one. I'm not even confident with that. But basically, he ends up, William basically ends up bringing him back after this, spins him around on a goddamn, in a parking garage. He's all this, kills those two guys. And is there, and William gets in the goddamn vehicle. Now he's going to drive him out, and he's basically going to torture him and kill him. Like the end of the original Speak No Evil. Sorry if you haven't seen it, but you have seen the vastly superior version as opposed to whatever the fuck the US one was. So that being said, they're driving out. He has talked about his daughter Emma. She got shot in the neck during a robbery, this kind of stuff. And he has not had much of a reason to live. So he decides to torture people, torture thieves. Look, I mean, I'd want to get revenge and stuff like that too, but everybody's got a different story and stuff like that. And also, there's not much to the... It's fine. By this point, I was checked out of the goddamn movie. And Eddie is getting his head bashed off the goddamn dashboard every single time, he tries to bow up and, knock William about how he's dealt with Emma's death and stuff like that. But then, he's finally able to do something because he managed to, fiddle with the switch with his toe, and he found the failsafe, the way to shut off the tech. I got one thing to say. What street smarts, bitch? Hits it, shuts the thing off, and the thing ends up crashing. Totally crashing. Flips over, this kind of stuff, whatever. And then William's pretty much fucked. And by the way, the voicemail that he had tried to send to his daughter that failed, finally sent because he was in a signal area. Because the technology was shut off and I guess the noise was taken care of. Nevertheless, William basically says, that was fun, Eddie, but then he ends up dying. But this is not before, this is just before he ends up answering the phone. And it's his daughter, and he left a very emotional message. He's worried. Are you going to come pick me up? Yes, I'm going to come pick you up, this kind of stuff. I promise I'm going to be better, this kind of stuff. And that might have landed better if we didn't go the goofy route with all this. Because I'm sorry, I would like to think that, the police aren't aware of this kind of stuff. I'd be aware of a self-driving car. I'm sorry. I think I'd wonder why there were two people, criminals or otherwise, killed in an alley. It's fine. It's whatever. It's just whatever. So, basically, he says he's going to pick his daughter up at 2:15. But then the car catches fire. And it seems like, well, he's fucked. Eddie's fucked. No, he manages to get out. And gets picked up by a guy. A nice passerby. Got to pick up my daughter. And then he's trying to get his car out. But his car is like in the back section of this giant like, garage complex area that seems to have like 3 doors and like it could house a goddamn ogre or a troll from that movie Troll. Who remembers that? Nevertheless, earlier he saw a bike that he was talking about possibly buying, joking about buying. He wanted to pick up his daughter, so he paid for the bike. I think it was like $75, if I remember right. Picks up his daughter, is all emotional, that's it. And then, yeah, there we go. Oh, yes, and I mean, yeah, the $500 scratch ticket. Maybe he turned his life around. Maybe he didn't. Maybe everybody blew up. There was one scene earlier, actually, that I did forget to mention. During the part where the car is driving around, William's driving the car around, that they chase the daughter, and Eddie is threatening to, like, basically take a gun and put it against his head, but that doesn't end up working. And the reason that the thing ends up getting even worse after the car crashes is Anthony Hopkins fires a gun and the bullet goes through him, and that's basically it right there. So that it's all a cavalcade of shit. The daughter chasing stuff again might have worked better, but it's just ends up being goofy. I'm sorry. Lock didn't work for me. 4x4 was all right. It's not anything I'm going to remember beyond the stuff I just recalled because I just saw it. But this is just one that I felt the need to just expand more on. And not expand because there were morons. It's just nothing really to it. it's just more to discuss because of the goofy nature of it. So unfortunately, it gets an F. And I like Bill Skarsgård and I like Anthony Hopkins, but that's all I gotta say. Agree, disagree, what I said, like, share, subscribe, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky handles in the description. I'm John Rentlin, and I'll see you soon.